known as Bowtie Combo. I'm your host, Dr. Bowtie Todd. We're excited to come back together for another conversation and continue our mission, seeking to create spaces for all humans to belong and thrive together, one Bowtie Combo at a time. To continue our learning series, today's Bowtie Combo will focus on conversations with children around race and inclusion in the classroom and, most importantly, in their home. Before we begin, a friendly reminder, the Bowtie Combo community, we have some simple rules for engagement of how to have an effective dialogue. And I definitely want to share those rules with you. We call it the Bowtie Way. So if this is your first time in the community, welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a quick acronym of how we engage in our everyday dialogue and for our community rules today. And the first letter of Bowtie is B. And any conversation, we're asking for this next hour to be mentally present. So we really want you to be here. We know you could be physically or remote, but be mentally present for the conversation. The next letter of Bowtie is open to new ideas. We have an awesome panel here today, and we are not going to say they're the experts on everything, all things, but we want you to be open to their ideas, and it's okay if you agree or disagree. We welcome that, actually. The next letter of Bowtie is willingness. Willing to share your own perspective and own your own truth. We want you to really utilize our chat feature, utilize the comments on Facebook, the chat box, and share your story. It's okay to interact. We just want to make sure we interact and engage in a very respectful way. And the hardest part of a bow tie, I'm not sure if we have any bow tie wearers today, but the hardest part of a bow tie is usually this knot in the middle. And we usually see this as the most challenging things of conversation, tying it together. And we want to encourage you to not only sit, listen, and learn, but also engage and add your own perspective and tie it together. And that's the most important part of today's conversation, is how can you tie it back to your own practice, your own home, your own personal life, etc. And so that's our simple rules. It's the Bowtie way: be mentally present, open to new ideas, curious, but most importantly, tying it together. So our hope is that we not only continue to tie it together, but we will engage, unravel, and connect and lead today's conversation better than we came in. So let's get ready to get started. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. It's very, very important that we all have some housekeeping rules. We are on Zoom Live as well as Facebook Live. And so with that being said, remember at any time, our participants, you can submit questions, and we'll make sure we leave some time before we wrap up today's conversation for our panel to be able to answer and address those questions. We want this interactive, so feel free to go ahead and drop in the chat box where you're tuning in from, and introduce yourselves. Welcome, welcome again to the Bowtie Conversation community. So without further ado, I am going to be quiet because we have some incredible humans that's in the space today, and I would like for you all to get to know them. And so I would love for our panelists to come before you all and tell us a little bit about yourselves, and your passion, and a little bit about, about your background. So let's go ahead and start with, let's see who from my left and right. Let's start with the Franklins. The Franklins, you are my first family. Listen to that, the first family that's engaging, and I love that. And so please let the world know who you are.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. We are, overjoyed to be a part of the Bowtie community, and of course, on this particular subject, it's a joy for us to be, especially even with this kind of distinguished panel. So we're thankful to be here for you with y'all. But you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm Rachel. We have Noah kind of peeking in, but if you see him coming, so we thought it'd be kind of fun to do a little back and forth to get a little introduction to us. I grew up in a rural agricultural community of approximately 1,500 people, very small.
And on the flip side, my name is Ron Franklin, and I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. And so, it's almost 500,000 people in the city of Kansas City. So yeah, I'm an urbanite. and yeah, got connected with a small town girl through our educational experience. So yeah, we met in college.
I lived in one home from the day I was born till I left for college.
Yeah, my lived experience was full of multiple front doors. So we've gone from Habitat from Humanity homes to living in apartment complexes, Section 8 housing from time to time, and now, yeah, for the first time, we're here in Orange City, Iowa now, where yeah, we own our home together. So yeah.
I was underage driving all over the farm with my grandparents. Wow.
Yeah, driving underage or without a license, in my case, led to me going to a holding cell until my parents picked me up. I was in a parking lot. So, yeah, just little snapshots of who we are and why this conversation is, yeah, pertinent for us.
I chose a college based on location and distance from home, less than 1 hour. My parents were concerned as I was moving from my small, predominantly white community to the most diverse community in Iowa.
And yeah, it was essentially backwards for me, right? Moving from Kansas City, Missouri up to Northwest Iowa, Storm Lake in particular. It is the most diverse city in the state. But yeah, it was nonetheless a cultural shift for me that way.
Again, we met at college, and our relationship definitely grew through our mutual love for the sport of basketball. Now we reside in a small, predominantly white community right down the road from where I grew up.
Yeah, more than just white, it is super Dutch. So that's like the foundational element of this community. And yeah, we've both had some navigating of difference in this space. But yeah, there's multiple layers in terms of why this conversation is of value for us. Of course, our family. Part of the work that I do, I'm director of multicultural student development. So that means I get to work with students who are coming from international and domestically diverse backgrounds to the college, and I help develop their leadership capacity so they can contribute to the community while we develop their gifts so that they're ready to go out in the world and make it a better place. So yeah, that's just a little snapshot for me. It's it's life work and it's family work, which is why we are happy to be a part of this.
Well, thank you all so much. Like, honestly, it is so cool to have the Franklins here. I wish I had like everyone could do like a round of applause. So I'm just so happy to have you guys here. So we're going to continue with the rest of the panelists. We're going to go to Miss Reed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan, and I am described as an educator entrepreneur. I have experience, probably almost 8 years experience in teaching special ed at the elementary, middle, and high level. I also am a program evaluator for after school programs, and I have my own business where I help empower individuals and organizations in reaching their full potential. I have a deep connection to the Franklin family because they don't know it yet, but my father is Irish and my mother is African American, so I grew up in a household that was also a mix of lots of experiences, and we'll talk more about that as we go on.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be great. So we're gonna keep on with the in the classroom. The great, my brother, Mr. White. Let the world know who you are.
Hey everyone, Barry White Jr. First of all, it's an honor to be on this panel with this phenomenal collection of talent. I feel like after hearing Franklin's resume, I shouldn't even be speaking right now. But no, but I'm originally from Queens, New York. Now I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am an educator, 5th grade literacy teacher, now administrator, just newly added to that team. And from my experience, teacher experience, it spans from working in affluent schools to Title I. If you're not familiar with that language, and of course, the low socioeconomic status, population of that nature. And one of the, I guess the reason why I get motivated and so pumped up to be in these spaces and have these conversations is I truly believe we're in a moment in history that is so pivotal to where we can truly normalize having these type of uncomfortable conversations and really being drivers in the shifting of mindsets, right? Because I think, speaking from an educator standpoint, a lot of times we can get wrapped up in the goal-oriented culture, with everything that's being, put on us. So we only focus on achievement, focusing on status, or, honor and privilege. And here now we get an opportunity to pull away from that and really promote the growth-oriented culture, to where we're actually focusing on developing people, right? Focusing on serving and stretching their mind, asking those critical questions that we always wanted to ask, but we had to operate under a framework. So that gets me pumped up. It's a quote that from one of my favorite authors, John Maxwell, that says, "Goals help me do better, but growth help me become better." So I'm on here to read these spaces to grow, and promote growth amongst everybody.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And even though he did not say this, but Mr. White is so humble. He is known as the handshake teacher. You guys can Google him. He's pretty well known. So we're just so happy to have you. But last but not least, we're going to go to the great doctor. We're going to go to the A. Welcome. Please let the world know who you are.
A-Town. Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Aisha Metzger. I'm so humbled and honored to be with you all this evening to participate in this important and timely conversation. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Georgia. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist by trade. I've been doing work on interpersonal and racial trauma for about 10 years. So I did my internship at the National Crime Victims Center in Charleston, South Carolina. I was on internship when Dylan Roof shot up Emanuel 8. And I was of the practitioners who were discharged into the local community. So right now, being in Athens, Georgia, which is adjacent to Atlanta, in the midst of this national conversation and recent events that have happened with Rayshard Brooks around the corner, just feels very reminiscent of past conversations that I've had. So I am, as I said, honored to be here with you guys tonight. My perspective, as we talked about our backgrounds, I am West African. So my parents are both from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I grew up in College Park, Georgia. So if you're familiar with Georgia, I was raised in what I didn't know was the hood until later. And I was bused to Sandy Springs, Georgia, most of my early childhood for what was called the Minority to Majority program. So being a first generation American, growing up in the hood, surrounded by, people who looked like me, and being bused to a predominantly white school very early on in my education, I think exposed me to a lot of situations, a lot of microaggressions and overt instances of racism and discrimination that made me deeply invested in this work in particular. Also coming from Sierra Leone, if you're familiar with the civil war that took place there, I'm interested in preventing the onset of PTSD after experiencing interpersonal traumas like wars, but also after experiencing racial traumas like we're seeing right now. So hopefully I'll be able to contribute to the conversation in that way. I do see some of my grad students in the chat here, so I want to shout them out. I do not have biological children, but I do have graduate students, and I do engage in, there she is, hey Rihanna, I do engage in the process of racial socialization, or the talk, with my students in academia, as well as they're navigating academia, much as Black youth have to navigate society. So that is the perspective that I'll try to bring today. And again, I'm just really happy to be here and to participate in the conversation.
Wow. Thank you all for being here. And, so let's begin. You were just talking about the talk, and most people have heard about the talk. And when I refer to the talk, I'm referencing the conversation that many African-American parents have with their kids about how to avoid altercations with police, or what to do and say if they're stopped, etc. And so due to the recent unrest sparked by anger over police brutality against Black individuals, African Americans, parents who are not Black are thinking more about how they should have talk with their kids about race. And so I was reading Jennifer Harvey, the author of Raising White Kids, Bringing Up Children in a Racially Unjust America. And she talks about how not to raise racist kids. And she discussed many things about how most white parents have come up in families in which white silence was basically the norm in the socialization. And even in K-12 education in certain communities, like white silence, these same parents are now passing such silence on to their kids. And sometimes I see a lot more conversations around, what does that look like? And so Miss Reed, who has experience in elementary and special education in the classroom and as an administrator, could you talk to us more about the importance of race being discussed today with children and offer us your perspective?
When I think about race in the home, I think about the opportunity to change the narrative that a certain skin color is inherently bad or inherently good. But in my household, my father, as I mentioned before, he's Irish, and my mother is an African-American, strong Black woman. And my dad would instill in us the importance of character. But then at the same time, my mom would instill in us the importance of Black is beautiful. And she also changed the narrative by, I don't know if she was bragging or what, but she would often say to my dad, I grew up with a colored TV in my house. But he didn't. So she was just trying to point out to us that just because you're a certain color doesn't mean that this behavior, this thing happened to you in your life. It doesn't mean that you grew up in a poor area. So, I come from a very strong village, actually. The people migrated from Virginia and settled outside of Philadelphia and built the town. They had their own schools, they had their own doctors. And the community that I grew up in just loved on us. My dad was actually the only white person in the town. And they would actually say that my dad is actually Black and my mom is white, but that's a whole nother discussion. And that she would get upset about. So, we have an opportunity to change narratives of what people are and not always judging them based on statistics and stereotypes that we bring in. And then, in the schools, we have an opportunity to change systems and structures on how we treat people when they have a behavior that looks like it might be racist. So, for example, I once had a student who happened to be a Black little boy. It was in high school, and he was drawing a swastika. And instead of, throwing the book at him and say, oh, you need to go to the principal, let's write you up, I asked him, I said, what does that mean? And he looked at me like, I don't know. It's just something I'm drawing, So I was like, well, this swastika, it represents oppression of the Jewish people. And, I explained how there's a connection between that and then what happened to African Americans, what happened to our people. And from that explanation, he got up, he ripped the paper up and threw it away. So, there was a change in mindset and a deeper understanding. And I think we need to give space to kids to help them grow so they don't grow up to be adults who are, being discriminatory at work and such.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think, to your point, opportunities for these conversations and further dialogue. And it's interesting because in the study, actually known by a psychologist by the name of Dr. Rebecca Bigler, and she's at University of Texas at Austin, and she studied children racial attitudes. And in the studies, it talks about babies recognizing the difference in skin color and hair textures when they're babies. So even before parents, 4. About 4. See, that's interesting. 4 months. Wow. And
no, 4 is when they can do racial bias, and 6 months is when they can start telling the difference.
Wow. And so even before parents can actually have a conversation with their children, parents can teach through their actions. So the Franklin family, I am so interested in your perspective. Will you walk us through the experiences in your home around the conversation of race as a family, and then specifically to your children.
Yeah, so you heard a little bit about our kind of racialized experiences growing up. So I grew up in a really multicultural context in terms of North Kansas City, where I'm going to school with people who are speaking multiple languages, and there's rich people who live in this part of town, and I got to ride in their expensive children's cars after athletic events and such. But in the morning when I was going to school, me and my friends were riding the bus because we were coming from the poor neighborhood, right? So that just gives you kind of a bit of a snapshot of the dichotomy. And of course, there was racialized representation in each of those spaces, right? So my lighter skinned, fair complected, mainly white peers were the ones with vehicles, and yeah, me and my squad was primarily Black, and we had a few Hispanic, Latino, some Asian, and some poor white folks in my neighborhood growing up. But, yeah, there was some clear differences in my upbringing that way. But my exposure to difference in a number of ways came through school, came through kind of the sanctuary or the church, and also through sports. So I got to play a lot of AAU basketball and travel the country a bit that way, to be able to see, you know, the differences that exist in different communities and such. But yeah, I was just talking to Rachel about this a little bit in terms of her upbringing and things that she's been experiencing. And for her, it was quite different. So her school was primarily white, but with kind of the recent trends of conversation, she's been hopping online and making some connections with some peers from her high school experience. And so I'm gonna let her tell a story. This is really recent. So she's had a Native friend who she wasn't close with, but through kind of these recent conversations have grown to, I mean, I was nearly in tears. This was just today, and hearing the types of connections that she was able to build with folks from her neighborhood.
Yeah, so living in our small community, I wasn't aware of racism, wasn't aware of those things happening to people. And after some posts that I had made from the death of George Floyd, we connected through private messaging, and she was sharing with me from all the way from her trips on the bus and the things that she would be said and the way she would make herself include her own racist comments to feel a part of the group, all the way to her employment at a community place that her and I both worked at the same location and had very big different experiences, yes, at a nursing home. And so, yeah, just connecting that and all the ways that I'm learning people silently suffer from this. I wonder how many people today would try to say that racism does not exist in our small community. And it's very evident that it was happening, people just weren't talking about it.
So that leads to our children, right? We are in this, yeah, massively Dutch white Christian community. I think we have about 6,000 people, but 17 churches. And so it's a really, really religious space, where of course you could make some assumptions about the foundational principles being of love, loving your neighbor as yourself, and loving God, and et cetera. But yeah, when it comes time to living those things out, it becomes a challenge. So I'm from Missouri, and it's the show me state. And so kind of I wear a little bit of that on my sleeve. Like, if you're going to talk about it, then you need to be about it. And so that's kind of the work that I've had the privilege of doing. But the challenge of race in children, especially in this space, I mean, it comes in a number of forms. So most children of color around here, if they're not Hispanic, Latino, if they have brown skin at all, it's because they've been adopted, and more likely from international context. And so there's kind of a benevolent posture in the community, but a lot of, yeah, the children who are Black or brown are either Hispanic, Latino, or adopted from a country outside of the U.S. And so questions, of course, begin to emerge for our kids, like, who are they going to be known as? Because, yeah, I think, yeah, if you go check the Virginia Racial Dot Project based on the demographics from the census, there may be one green dot, and I think that's our household. But there are now a few more. So some students have graduated and they live in the community. But we've had to have some real conversations both with our kids and the spaces that they occupy in terms of even where they go to daycare. So it's almost a gift and a curse to be aware of some of the research on how early kids recognize difference, how they react to things like the doll study, and then also how teachers and educators respond, right? And so the expulsion rate for Black and brown kids is pretty astronomical in comparison to the general student population. So anyway, I am walking out of daycare one day and I see a peer of Noah's who also has brown skin, biracial kid, and he has some behavioral differences, right? And so while I'm trying to manage kids for whatever reason, these dudes have some attractability to them, so the kids chant Noah, Noah when he comes to school, right? Or to preschool. And I'm managing, kind of the crowd that's approaching him. But Aiden, his friend, comes, he wants to give me a hug. And so I give him a hug. But as I'm walking out, I see him fall out on the floor, and I can see through the windows, and he gets snatched up by his arm from the floor, right? He's kind of throwing a tantrum, and this was the response, was to yank him up off the floor by his arm. And I had this moment, right? If I'm going to talk about this stuff, this is what I do at work, be an advocate and et cetera. And then I witnessed something like this happen in a space. It's not my kid. What am I going to do to help be a part of something better, right? And I had to come home. It took me probably 10 minutes to come home, run it by Rachel. I was like, yo, do I say something or not? Because there will be implications for my kids. And then we need to have conversations with them when they get home, because people are going to be treating them different. And that's exactly what happened, right? So the posture toward me changed as we enter that space. My conversations with Noah are all about, right, including the kids who seem like they are on the margins. And that's something for us. Yeah, we haven't necessarily had the talk, but the posture of inclusion, that's something that's really essential for us. But that also comes through my work at the college, where I get to expose our boys to Black and brown women in particular, because it's really easy for them to connect with Black athletes who are frequently on our campus, but the women not so much. And that's troubling for me, because my sister, of course, looks like me. And that creates, a lot of anxiety for me to think, like, when my kids were babies, as early as 4 months, they wouldn't have been ready or willing or warm to meet or greet my mom or my sister, my baby sister. So so these conversations are essential. I'm thankful that we're having them, but we have to be really intentional about two things: exposure and experience. And so they've been babysat by really diverse women, mainly international, so that they can have some exposure to some different parts of the world and different perspectives. And then we try to get them as many experiences across difference as possible, and being close to the college campus helps us in that way.
Wow. So I really appreciate that perspective. I mean, you said so much about, and thank y'all for sharing your experience and the type of conversations and the type of exposure you're doing with your children. Dr. Isha, I definitely want to go to you next, given your research and your expertise in talking about racial socialization that affect Black youth and engaging minorities in education. What are some of the challenges you may foresee of race dialogue with children within the minority community versus the white community? Do you feel that are there any parallels? Also, can you talk to us about the potential trauma effects on children related to race?
Yeah, I think I can answer that in a couple different ways. So I think important challenges with talking about race with Black kids is that we want to make sure to have a good balance between talking about our history and heritage and what makes being Black great, but also balancing that with barriers or challenges or experiences with racism that our kids might face. And I think that that's a delicate balance that parents face with kids of any age, and that is to say, yes, you're Black, people are going to notice that, you are great because you are Black. However, these are some experiences that you might encounter. So with that, I think our job as parents is to first figure out a developmentally appropriate way to have these conversations with our kids, right? We don't want to, the first time they're hearing about racism be that they're seeing someone murdered on the internet, right? We don't want the first time they're hearing about racism to be when it's someone in their class, in my case, calling them an African booty scratcher, or right, a teacher treating them as if they're less intelligent because they're Black. So I think once we have, as parents, as educators, cross that initial barrier of, okay, how do I have this conversation with a 6-year-old, right? A 4-year-old knows what race is. How do you talk to a 6-year-old about that and let them know that as a Black person, you might be treated differently? Right, so I think that that's the first barrier that we have as people trying to have that conversation. And I always say, any kid who likes candy knows how to discriminate, right? So my favorite example is thinking about M&Ms, right? All M&Ms are chocolate. They're all filled with the same chocolate, but you get your bag of M&Ms and everyone all of a sudden knows what M&Ms they want, right? You want the red ones, you want the orange ones, the brown ones sit off to the side. People are sorting their M&Ms by color, and that's a very natural process that kids go through. And that's an opportunity that we have as caregivers or as educators to then say, do you see how you sorted those M&Ms and how you're able to make a choice and you have preferences in M&Ms that you like, despite the fact that all of the M&Ms are the same, right? And then talking to them about society and saying that historically, society treats people differently as well. And our job is as people to celebrate all M&Ms and to look at the brown M&Ms and to see that they're brown M&Ms, right? And to know that they're just as good as the red M&Ms as well. And I think once we broach that initial conversation, then we're allowed to ask kids about their own experiences, to ask them about their own reactions to those experiences. And I think that speaks to your question about parallels that we see, right? So the parallel is that Black kids as well as white kids are going to have the question about why, right? Why is this happening? Why are we treating Black people differently? The older they are, you can start talking about history and systems of oppression, right? And where you grow up and the people that you're around and the proximity that you have and in groups and out groups and familiarity and biases. But with younger kids, we're able to have conversations about, do you see a bully? Have you ever seen a bully on the playground? Do you see that sometimes bigger kids pick on smaller kids, right? Unfair things happen. And as a Black person, you can say that sometimes Black people are treated differently as well. As a white kid, you can say, do you see how you speak up and you stop a bully and maybe you tell a teacher if they're picking on someone smaller? You can also use that as an opportunity to stand up for or help out a Black kid if you see that they're being picked on because of the color of their skin, for example. So I think that the challenges are different in that for Black kids, you're teaching them how to cope with or heal from this experience with discrimination, whereas for white kids, you might be showing them how to be a better ally, right? And I'm using Black and white because we often think in terms of Black and white, but we can just say marginalized groups, right? And those in the majority. And even Black people, we have opportunities where we can serve as allies. So I do want to point out that nuance as well. But to say that all families are having these conversations, the challenges are different depending on the age of your kiddo, right? So if it's a teenager who is watching something on the news or on social media, you're able to have a totally different conversation with them, right? And that conversation can just start by, what have you seen? And what are your reactions to that? How do you feel? And then you're able to have more of a deeper conversation about some of the systems that are in place, some injustices that happens, right? So why do we talk about Black Lives Matter? Why is that important? Because historically we've seen that Black lives are undervalued in the criminal justice system, for example. Depending on what it is that you're reacting to, you're able then to determine how you're able to phrase that response or how you're able to have that conversation with your kiddo.
No, I really appreciate that perspective, and you know, a lot of times in a lot of groups that we meet and engage with, I do hear parents sometimes they talk about, you know, hey, I teach my kids not to see color. You know, I try to teach my kids that, you know, everyone is the same, and you know, so you have this philosophy and this approach, you know, the methodology around teaching and facilitating the learning. And so Mr. White, someone who's the epitome of engagement and making learning fun in the classroom, I would love to know what are some practical ways you believe to educate children and learning about race and inclusion? And any teacher, I know we have a lot of teachers listening, so any tips for teachers on how to facilitate or practice or even where to begin?
Thank you for that. First, I just want to take time to uplift Dr. Asia for her work, what she's doing, especially if you're talking about the potential trauma that's affecting Black children at an early age. And the reason why I say that is really quickly is because I was having a conversation with one of my buddies. And we were talking about stereotype vulnerability or stereotype threat. And that's simply the risk of confirming the stereotype and how, you know, because of years of experience in this trauma and what we see in society, when students come to the classroom to have been assessments, whether it's, you know, a white student and a Black student with the same intellectual ability, but one of them is facing a serious or severe anxiety on whether or not they can pass the test, whether they're going to fail and live up to a stereotype that says that they're inferior to the other. So it's just that always going on. So that's, you know, extremely important, the work that she's doing. To answer your question, though, as far as what are some practices and where to even begin. Anytime I've always asked where to begin, I always start with teachers and educators alike. Before we get all, you know, gung-ho and charged up to go into the classroom and implement these practices, let's start, folks, make sure that we have invested in self. When I say that, I'm talking about doing some serious self-reflection, because I can go in with all the tools and the tricks, but if I haven't actually reflected on my own unconscious bias, you know, what I may not know, when I, you know, at times I'm having some microaggressions, or if particularly at times is my teaching style, you know, non-stereotypical, is my examples non-stereotypical, right? I got to ask these questions, like, am I only teaching African American culture in February or celebrating Hispanic culture in September? Like, there's some of these questions that we have to unpack ourselves before we get all, okay, let me go change, you know, this classroom's whole environment and change the narrative. Let's make sure we change ourselves before we do that, because that can get lost a lot of times, right? So I just wanted to establish that. But as far as when you go into the classroom, for me personally, I love to take the community approach, which is specifically, you know, whether that's you see through distance learning, how we have access to, you know, technology and all these different tools at our disposal, even if we're doing virtual field trips, right? Or designating certain days, cultural expansion days, like, you know, where we can, the same way we have, you know, Learn Check Friday or Assessment Friday, you know, whatever, we can be super intentional about, okay, this is every Monday we're going to pick a culture, you know, from somebody representing somebody in that class. We're going to expand on it. We're going to unpack. We're going to, you know, broaden our experience as perspective on this particular thing, and really, you know, create that safe environment for everybody to feel comfortable in sharing, right? So, and I just want to be real clear about that. When I say virtual, you know, field trips or the community approach, we make sure that we're avoiding the tourist approach, which is, you know, I'm only going to, you know, talk about, you know, African American in February, or I'm only going to, you know, pull on this Hispanic heritage when I'm looking at a Hispanic book or something like that. Like, for example, you know, in Black History, February in Black History Month, you see a lot of assignments on Dr. Martin Luther King. Well, why about during the regular school year, if I'm teaching science, I also bring in a lesson on Katherine Johnson, you know, the NASA mathematician, because that's related to science, right? So I'm still teaching that you know, that culture experience, but through a regular lesson, as opposed to waiting for a holiday for me to celebrate that, right? So that's one of those things. And then there's really a lot of time, or right now everybody's kind of scrambling to fill their libraries with, you know, diverse books and, you know, things of that nature, and, you know, want to check their classroom for items that may have, you know, bias on it. But even with those things, I would say don't take down everything, because some certain items you can use as an example and, you know, to really model, okay, now let's have a conversation around this particular item on why is this, you know, exhibiting bias toward this targeted person, and what does that mean? Why does it look like that? And just really expanding on the different perspectives from different, you know, all your students and all your backgrounds, and really respecting them. Like, even if we do, in addition to that, in my class, I teach elementary, so we even have the oops and ouch rule, right? So, you know, if a student says something that offends you or that hurts you, then coach say oops. Ouch. And then the student who offended you would say oops, right? So there's some of these practical things that we're doing. If you're talking about even upper elementary, we can even start with, you know, even writing prompts, like talk about a time that you experienced racism, also microaggressions, and then, you know, unpack that. You can you know, unpack that with your students and really walk through, okay, does this really provide them a space, you know, safe environment where they feel comfortable doing this, and have some type of a confidentiality rule to where it is they don't have to worry about what they say in the classroom being taken out to the yard or the recess or the playground, you know, lunch, cafeteria. Kind of establishing that rule and setting the standard and tone early on that this is how we're going to, in this classroom, we're going to respect everybody's background, everybody's perspective, and that's the standard, the level of excellence that we're going to operate throughout the whole year, right? So, and I'm saying a lot of practical tools with technology, because that's what, you know, age that we're in. So even if you do like a word cloud, to where you have, you know, students just, you know, type in certain feelings after you watch a certain video or you pull the certain media, and then you can unpack in the classroom. Now, okay, well, what words are we seeing as the largest, or what words are we seeing being repeated, right? And talk about that. And once again, essentially is providing those opportunities and spaces to continuously talk about this, and not just have that one-off lesson or that, you know, that one PowerPoint that you talked about. Okay, you checked off a list, but continuously, you know, growing throughout the entire year. I think those are some of the greatest approaches that I've seen work. As far as when it comes in my classroom, there's also a great video. I've probably seen it, the peanut butter and jelly video on YouTube, where they talk and just watch that, and you can talk about implicit bias. What's the difference between implicit bias and just racism? And just, you know, just some of those practices that I think that'd be extremely beneficial in the classrooms, particularly, and engaging, because once again, you just want to make sure that this is an ongoing process and conversation, and it's not just a one-off thing. And just continuously doing, you know, things of that nature, I think, can really start to shift the narrative and really change the mindsets that a lot of our students may unconsciously have. Because, like my fellow panelists were talking about, it starts at home, right? So when it comes to the classroom, I'm just really receiving what's kind of already been embedded, and I'm starting to now try to mold and help unpack and unlearn and relearn, you know, while throughout 180 days in the school year, but for 8 hours a day, but they still got to go back home. So just, you know, engaging some of those activities and practices, I think could be extremely beneficial, you know, in that manner.
Yeah, I really definitely appreciate that, Mr. White, because the interesting piece of this, what you were saying, is not only just the practical learning, but technology and having the conversation and unpacking what has been seen. And so now children, they have phones, they have media everywhere on all devices, you know, most times. If they have that accessibility, I understand we have different populations, like rural communities may not have all the accessibility, but we see students and kids, children, you know, I'm one of 13 kids. So I have baby brothers, and they have cell phones, they have devices. And so I know we have different things that you can kind of put restrictions on what kids can see or not. However, you know, with like things like the videos, like George Floyd's death, as an example, it circulated all across all channels. And so I'm curious to know from any of the panelists' perspective, do you wait for a child to come see you to have that conversation, or do you show it to the child and say, hey, this is something I need to talk to you about? Is it an appropriate time? And I did see some things in the chat that, you know, individuals say, do we wait until something happened, then we react and we have the conversation? Or any perspective, anybody want to share their thoughts on that type of scenario?
As response is that you definitely should not shy away from having these conversations as the media makes the topic readily accessible. However, they shouldn't be the first time. This is my nephew, this little brown boy right there. It should not be the the first time you're having these conversations with your family. So as long as it's an ongoing conversation and you are open to having these conversations, it shouldn't come as a surprise when you are then saying, remember, we've been, or we've talked before about how some people are treated unfairly, or how we've talked before about police interactions with Black people in America. This is something that happened recently, and I don't want, if you're going online on social media, for you to be unexpectedly triggered. It's something that, depending on the age and depending on whether or not they've already been exposed to it, I personally recommend not intentionally re-exposing your child to some of these more disturbing and graphic images. I don't think that's necessary to have the parts of the conversation that we need to have, but certainly if children are exposed, or if teens are exposed to those images, you are able to say, this isn't a movie, right? I do expect that you're having some physical reactions, some emotional reactions to those. Let's take some time to unpack that. How does that make you feel? What are your thoughts about it? Are you having those conversations with your friends? How are those going, right? So just checking in with them and having an open conversation, I would say. But again, that it should be a part of an ongoing conversation that you're having as a family.
To piggyback off of what you're saying as well, what comes to mind when I hear questions like that is, I was always told growing up, and I'm sure you have as well, don't take candy from strangers, right? You've always heard that, right? And the reason for that is why? Because one, you want to prepare your child, because for that danger, because it might be scary. But then when I think about, as me being an African American male, America is scary. So why am I waiting? Why would I wait for something to happen to me to have that conversation? I want to be prepared prior to that, right? So just like she was saying, establishing just having that conversation and just opening the space and opportunity to and talk about your differences and way that can be whether what your hair texture looks like, the way your skin color is, or your God-given abilities, and just lifting them up and kind of is providing words of affirmation so that they know that it's not just, it's not just your life or value isn't based on what society perspective is of you or perception they have of you. It is based on what you feel about yourself, and it's kind of empowering them that way and continuously, having that ongoing conversation, like you said, and pumping them, continuously pumping them affirmation, because God knows with social media now, they're seeing everything, and and they're not seeing it, their friends are sending it to them. So it's like there's no way to avoid that, or to shelter anyone from that. Like now it's time to really expose that, not like she's saying, not like the graphic and images and things of that nature, but just have those soft conversations, but hard truths of that. Sometimes there's a reason why I'm telling you have to be attending to on the well, like you're talking about teenagers and college students, or there's a reason. Because a lot of times you find in elementary, I can even think about, a student that may have, acted out or had a rough day, or labeled, had a behavior problem. And I'm just thinking, what if they were offended by some type of microaggression, but they didn't know how to articulate that? They didn't know how to, actually put that in words that, hey, I'm offended, not because of what you did to me, a teacher, because of what you said. So instead, they just acted out. But they didn't have that type of, toolkit, accessible to them. So us providing that for them, I think we're allowed them to advocate for themselves. That's what we want to teach students, like student agency, to be able to advocate for themselves, right? So that's what I think about that.
I love that, and I just want to add that one of the important things that you just mentioned is being able to advocate for yourself and what that process looks like. And a lot of it, I think, is one, in recognizing that you're offended and why you're offended, right? And then being able to articulate how it feels, and what your reaction to it is, and what you would like for that person to do to remediate it moving forward, right? So I think that all of those are important parts. And when we're thinking about developing emotional intelligence within our kids, that it's really important to say, okay, this experience happened or may happen, let's think about a time where you felt this way before. How does it feel in your body, right? How are you able to recognize that you are offended or stressed out because of this situation? And once you are recognizing that, how are you then able to express that in a way that allows you to have positive conversations, right? And to have positive changes come from those conversations as you advocate for yourself. So I think it's really important to think about the 3-step or the process that you have to go through to recognize what you're feeling, to advocate for yourself, and then to push towards coping and further than that, healing and thriving, right? So being able to raise your hand in class and know that, right, I am intelligent and I am articulate, and even if I don't get called on, this is how I can respond and talk to my teacher afterwards and advocate for myself. So she knows I'm expecting to understand this material. I'm asking questions not because I'm dumb, right, but because I'm intellectually curious, right? And I'm able to then raise my hand again when the time presents itself, and again, raise my hand again, and manage that impression that I have of myself, but also be able to advocate for myself to my teacher.
I love that point. And speaking of curiosity, I love the, children are so curious. And I don't know what happened in adult land where curiosity just go, whoo. No, we wake up every day as adults and it's like, we just do the same. We don't ask those questions like the 3rd graders and 2nd graders. And, one of our mutual friends, the Franklins, one of our great friends, the Dallaports, they came and they visit our home. And I remember talking to, I call them my nephews, but they're 2 white individuals, they're young kids, they're twins. And the boys asked me, they were pointing the colors of my wife and I, and was telling us, oh, he's brown, she's lighter brown. And it's so interesting to hear their curiosity, but it allows for that conversation and that exposure. And I think that's very healthy. But I also see, especially, in communities that is not as diverse, right? I hear this a lot when I go around and speak. It's like, hey, our community is very rural. We don't have a lot of Black and brown communities, or they may be international. My kids don't see that. And I do understand parents must do their best to expose their kids, their children, to diverse environment. And it's also very important for kids to see their parents interacting socially with people of other racial and ethnic groups. It's very, very important. But I'm curious to know, Franklin's or anyone, what advice do you have for those parents and educators who they were raised in a very little to non-diverse community, or they're living in a non-diverse community today? How do you engage your children or kids in the learning and exposure of other communities when they may feel that continue to be the challenge and barrier?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first response will hinge on Dr. Isha's suggestions that we, essentially it's scaffolding, right? So we start with an accessible place of talking about difference, and we might call it inequity in adult land, but they would call it unfairness, or, so you start there with those types of conversations. And then I think when the opportunities begin to present themselves, and so I am surprised actually at how much our boys are asking questions about skin and who they are and what they represent, and what it means to be in the skin that they're in light of the parents that are in front of them, right? And so, this ranges from putting on suntan lotion, do we do it or not? What type of music do we listen to? How do we dance? Why do certain people speak in our neighborhood in the ways that they do? So you can't see our home, but in one direction, there is a trailer park court where our Hispanic Latino brothers and sisters live. And then on the other side is a cul-de-sac, right? Where a very different demographic, I think all white kids in our neighborhood, other than our 2 boys. So, but I'll kind of use that to set the table for Rachel to even just tell a couple of nuggets of what Noah, our oldest, what he has brought, because often it comes to mom, and yeah, I'm the tough guy with it. But no, there's this sensitivity, right, with mom. And so he has more time spent with mom, and then these questions that he asks. And then later I get to come and engage them. But mom gets to hear them firsthand. But you want to tell them a couple?
It's been since the virus happened. So within the last couple of months, we were walking, we have a trail here. And that's, I think for him, that's when his mind really gets to click into. And we're walking along and he's asking about this thing or that. And all of a sudden he says, Mom, was God mad when he made me? And I was like, no, not at all. Why, why would you even bring that up? He said, well, because he made my skin brown. Wow. Okay. I mean, like, where do you go with that? So we just talked through it a little bit, and God made people of all color and he loved them all the same and this and that. And so they're very aware. They're very aware that their hair type is different. Jonah is much more tight curl. Noah's got more of like a loose curl. So at that time we talk about hair. We talk about, when we go on hunts for birthday gifts. When he got very interested in Legos, I scoured the internet to find a black Lego. And the only thing I could find was Finn from Star Wars.
And that's
that was the
last
only Lego.
couple years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then on my part, I get to do the mistakes of trying to get my boys exposed to heroes early, probably earlier than they should, because they love the Avengers and such, right? And I'm like, I got to make sure they see themselves as heroes somehow. And the closest option at this point in time is T'Challa, the Black Panther. Wakanda forever, yeah. But we tried to sit down and watch that film, and the first 2 minutes and the action and the right, we had to cut the movie off. I'm like, man, how can I ensure that he sees himself as a hero when the options are so limited? And so in terms of encouraging parents and thinking about what to do next, I think you have to do that intentional work, especially if you have Black or brown children, to find heroes. And so we've ranged from, Molly of Denali on PBS Kids to looking at Hero Elementary, which is, this PBS is doing some really cool things to create some inclusive character foundations.
I like wide class.
And he loves animals, right? But more specific, like the first movie I took him to was Into the Spider-Verse. And he was fairly young, I think, about 4 years old or so. But nonetheless, he is a super fan of Miles Morales, right? And so the difficulty is that in some spaces that is in contrast to his friends, because they think Spider-Man is Peter Parker, the white boy, right? And so we get to have some really interesting conversations about, what it means to be, in this particular context, a superhero, right? And so I think, for parents, you really have to do some intentional work to ensure that affirmation comes to the forefront, so that they know that they're beautiful, that they're loved, that they're gifted. And then you can start to have those conversations when you see that it maybe is not happening for other kids, or when we come home and we talk about who they played with and who they didn't play with. Then you can have some honest conversation about, was that appropriate? Was that fair? Was that something you would have enjoyed if somebody treated you that way? And then that, again, is building the agency. And in our household, we're kind of all about this leadership posture where you can help make the world better. And so we try to equip our kids with those capabilities, but it starts with that affirmation of who they are at the same time.
Wow. I think people forget the power of arts and culture, in your community, and the power on, with media, the power with cultural events. Now, I really don't feel like we have an excuse today, because we have that power in technology that you could bring arts and culture in your home to experience learning. And I wanted definitely to open it up for, we have some questions for the panelists, and I wanted to get to them, I promise, this time before we end the chat. And so I want to go ahead and go to our first question. This is actually one of my former students. He works as a student pastor in Arkansas. He works with, this is his words, so I'm going to read for him. I work with the majority white children as I've had conversations about race and inclusion with them. I've often felt I'm combating defensiveness or responses of denial that they picked up from their parents. This frustrates me that many of them proclaiming Christian families seem to have a deeper care for whiteness and American nationalism than for Jesus loving, inclusive, multi-ethnic kingdom. However, I also feel hesitant telling a student, I think your parents are wrong and have taught you a lie. Can you give some advice on how to challenge wrong ideas that students have grown up hearing from their parents without invalidating or disrespecting their parents? Any answers from the panelists?
So I can give some real experiences around this. So my father, as I said before, he's Irish and he grew up in a Catholic home, and his family does have the mindset that you don't see color. So even to this day, when I have conversations, I'm one of 5. When my brothers and sisters and I have conversations, and my mom, he'll say that he doesn't see color. It's all about the character. So like we physically put our hands on his hands and say, you don't see, like, I'm different than you. It doesn't mean I'm bad or good, but you know, it'll take a long time. And you know, I'm 33 years old and my dad still says this to me. So I don't know if, sorry, I'm 34, I just had a birthday. I don't know if it's gonna change overnight, but continue to show God's love to him and the people that you interact with, and continue to show good character. That's all I really can suggest, because of my own lived experience. I don't see it changing overnight.
I appreciate that. Any other perspectives?
Yeah,
Oh, my bad.
Go, Barry. Okay, just 2 quick snapshots. So I see there's a reflection on minister and scripture and such. There's 2 things. The church in general, what's mentioned in this, neither Jew nor Greek, that was like completely countercultural at the time, right? So people would wake up in the morning and be thankful that they were a Roman citizen, that they were a male, and that they were not a slave. So the message that Paul was giving in that space to say neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male or female, is that type of community, the Christian community, or the followers of the way, they wouldn't have been called Christians at that time, is that they were counter to the culture, right? And so specifically in relation to breaking down the walls of hostility that existed between those distinctive groups. But leaning back to the start of that text, the book in general, there's this really poignant phrase that says we are made in the image of God. That is, regardless of if you are a believer, a follower, an atheist, a murderer, it doesn't matter. All of those things are actually in some way beautiful and in a number of ways broken. And so with that, we should be posturing ourselves in a way to be able to see that if I am to adhere to a message of this good God, there is no way that it can be narrowed down into one expression of culture or identity. And so I've heard one person say that culture, or race in particular, should not be idolized, nor should it be ignored, right? The creator of the universe and, you know, the Christian frame is big enough to manage all of that. And so that would be my hope and encouragement, is to say, actually pay attention to the gospel from start to finish, and you will see race, ethnicity, culture, and difference everywhere. But it all depends on the type of goggles that you take into cracking that book open.
Great point. Great point. I wanted, go ahead, Mr. White. I see you want to weigh in.
Yeah.
On it. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was gonna be really quick. Great response, both y'all. I would just say, for those type of conversations, like, I invite that, like the ones that, you know, there's a lot of pushback. And what I love to do is, one, establish that I want to make sure that, one, they don't feel attacked, because especially if it's a student or something like that, to where we kind of just establishing that you can be a great person in a bad system, right? And the system I'm talking about is America, right? Let's be clear about that. So, so even going a little further, that it's the difference between not being racist and then being anti-racist, right? So we know about that. Like, so yeah, I can very much lean on my shield or down the hill that, oh, I have never said anything bad, or, you know, I never thought of this person that way. But then I'll ask the question, great, have you stood up or spoken up for somebody who has? Or when you've seen it happen, have you addressed it? Have you done something to try to use your privilege or anything to try to enact change, right? So it's like, it's a difference in those opinions. And then I like to always stay grounded. I love what Franklin just did. Stay grounded in facts. Like, you know, because we, you know, conversations get heated or debates happen. Let's stay grounded in what's factual here. Like, you know, everybody got cell phone, kids love Instagram and all that. Let's go to Google. Let's go to, that's your best friend anyway in college and everything else. So let's go to Google. Let's look this up. Let's actually have a legit conversation, an intellectual conversation, as opposed to just opinionated, which, you know, is going to be counterproductive because it's just based on, oh, I feel this way, you feel that way. Well, let's talk about what's real. So just kind of stay grounded in facts and just establishing in that circle, if you can, that I'm not personally attacking you. I want to have an open dialogue about whether or not we are doing enough, as opposed to doing the bare minimum or being complacent, right? Or being with, you know, just not being racist is not enough. Right? We have to do more now. So in those circles, I tend to lean towards that. I even think about an example with education when a lot of times you hear teachers say, you know, white teachers say, you know, I want the same for everybody's children that I want for my own. Well, that's great if you know, but you also think about perspective. Which perspective are you coming from? Which lens are you looking at? Are you looking at it from your lens? Maybe a middle class background that grew up in, you know, societal ideas that, you know, in order to be successful in America, you have to think this way, dress like this, speak like that, right? You know, we know I'm talking about the unspoken code that's there. If you come from that perspective, then guess what? You want the same for them as you have your children. It's not going to work for children black and brown that hasn't adopted that idea. You need to do more. You need something different. So it's not necessarily that you had bad intentions, that your perspective wasn't broadened enough to identify with that. So just those type of conversations, I think, do well for me, especially in the education zone with my colleagues and counterparts. And we have great dialogue. You know, we really push forward the new narrative.
Thank you for that. I see we have a couple more questions to get through real quick. This was something I submitted earlier for you, Dr. Isha. What are your thoughts about the possibility of trauma experienced by the 17-year-old who filmed George Floyd's murder? This is someone who a lot of the media is not talking about, but would you like to give us your perspective or insights on that question?
Yeah, that actually was something that hit home for me when I saw she did a few interviews early on, and I haven't seen much of her since, but she definitely said that she herself was traumatized. She definitely said that she herself was feeling conflicted about her actions in the moment. She definitely seemed to show, right, of course, I can't diagnose anyone, I have to say that, just based on what I saw, she definitely seemed to show signs of someone who had been through a stressful experience and was dealing with some sort of trauma from it. And I think that, like the person recording it, those of us who have, well, I say us, I'll say y'all because I refuse to, but those who have also witnessed or watched that 8 or 9 or 10-minute video should also be careful to make sure that our reactions are one that we're mindful of, and that our reactions are ones that, one, we know are typical reactions, but that we know are having an effect on our thoughts, on our mental health, on our feelings and our behaviors, and how we're able to respond to the world. So really for her and the many of us who have seen that, I would say to be mindful of traumatic reactions. So making sure that, so hypervigilance is one, right? So being easily startled or on guard. And that is something that takes place when you are in a day-to-day normal interaction. You could just be around, right, white people, or you could just be around police, right? And all of a sudden you notice that, again, we talk about physical reactions to stress. You notice that your heart is beating, right? You notice that your palms are sweaty. You notice that you are on higher alert. So that is one. Loss of sleep, loss of concentration is something that you want to be mindful of. So if you're at work and you're getting a bunch of emails and they're feeling overwhelming one day, it's probably because you are dealing with some vicarious trauma responses. Just negative alterations in your thoughts and in your mood. So feeling angry, right? Feeling like there's something you want to do, but you're not quite sure how to let those emotions and those feelings out, right? These are things that we all experience that we should be mindful of, one, when they're occurring, but two, mindful of how to respond to them. And I say, often when you're experiencing something, that the easiest response is to combat it with the opposite feeling or the opposite action or the opposite thought. So if you're feeling hopeless, do something that gives you a sense of control. Call a senator, donate to, write a bail fund, go to a protest, engage in a behavior that will remind you of something that you have control over. If you're feeling angry, right? Do something that brings you joy. If you're feeling angry because of what they're doing to Black people in the media, right? Listen to music, if you like listening to music, that responds and reacts to that in a way that you can relate to. Talk to people who bring you joy, who you also know are going to be like-minded. Go get on Facebook and start debating with people in the comment section, because what happens when that happens? Now you're stuck, you're at work, you're upset, you're mad, you're angry, your heart beating fast, you can't concentrate on anything, right? So be mindful of the people that you're interacting with. Be mindful of the way that you protect yourselves and the way that you cope. Set boundaries. I tell my students all the time, log off, right? If someone sends you something and there's no trigger warning, you can let them know, hey, I understand that this is work that I do and that you know that I'm deeply invested in it, but I'm actually oversaturated with the imagery. Happy to have a conversation, but I'm not able to take any more of seeing it, right? And I hope that you would respect that and that we would be able to talk about something that makes me happier, right? I've told people straight up, listen, I do this all the time. I do it for work. I'm just not interested in having that conversation right now.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you bring this up, because this is actually a great question when we're talking about responses and how you should respond. And so this is a great question about what tactics can we teach children to speak up when they have been a target of racism. If they tell the person that what they did or said was racist, the perpetrator will most likely get defensive. What can we tell kids to say instead?
Yeah, so I say to always make it I focused and how it affected you. So not you're being racist and you're an evil person, but this made me feel like I'm being treated less than because of my skin color, right? So saying how you feel and what your perception is. I'm feeling like when you called me Erica and there's only 2 Black people in the classroom, right, that you are erasing a part of my identity, right? I am Aisha, right? So giving them the ability to recognize what the infraction was, but also to correct them in that stance. Not saying you're a horrible person, but this is how it makes me feel, and giving them then the opportunity to accept, hear, and correct that behavior. So what you guys have alluded to in the comments is that people's reactions are not always validating of our experiences, right? And what do we do in those instances? That's when racial socialization comes into play. And we've already had those conversations, right? With our caregivers, with our friends, with our loved ones. And we're already aware of ambiguous forms of microaggressions and the fact that people can invalidate your experiences. And that's when you go back home and you talk to your friend and you say, am I crazy? This is what happened today. And they're able to tell you, no, you're not crazy, right? So I think that there are things that we can do in the moment to stand up for ourselves and say, this is how it made me feel. I'm going to leave that with you. right? Because often what happens is they turn it right back around. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. And they put it back on you. No, I'm going to leave that with you, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to correct that, right? And then I'm going to go back to the people who I trust and who I'm able to talk to, and we're going to process as we need if you're defensive. If not, we can have this conversation and we can move forward just as if you stepped on my foot, I said ouch, and you said oops, and we moved on, right? But if you step on my foot and I say ouch and you say, well, you're not hurt, or no, I didn't step on your foot, now that's something else where I'm going to have to say, okay, I'm going to let you have that. That hurt me. I'm not, right? I'm putting up that boundary of protection, and I'm going to go engage with someone who validates me in my experience.
Now, I definitely appreciate that perspective, man. Wow. I mean, we went over. We usually say we're going to get in you talk about this for an hour, but I did not want to stop the conversation early because this is such an important dialogue. But I do want to wrap up and say thank you all so much. I've learned a lot. And so some of my thoughts for today's Bowtie Convo, we learned parents are children's introduction to the world. And educators are facilitators to how the world learn. And what children see you do, whether educators or parents, is very important. And as not only to what they see you do, but what they hear you say. Like language, prejudice is learned over time. And helping your child recognize and confront racial biases, you should first consider your own. Does your friend circle or people you work with represent a diverse and inclusive group? I do believe small changes can make a big difference. So take every opportunity to challenge racism, really practice kindness, show kindness, and stand up for every person right to be treated with dignity and respect. And so thank you all so much for tying it together today with me. If you really enjoyed today's conversation, feel free to share this with others, connect with all of our panelists on Instagram or Facebook, the Franklins, or you can shoot me an email for your feedback. We'll love to hear from you. Next week's topics, we'll be back together again next Thursday. It's going to be a fun conversation. It's going to be the Bowtie Convo, a conversation with old white men about race and inclusion. And yes, they're all 70 years plus. It's something you definitely don't want to miss. It's going to be incredible. So as we close, I ask that this conversation does not stop here. Continue Bowtie conversations in your own space and be good to yourself so we can all be good to the world. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And until next time, my friends, peace, love, and happiness.